Perfect. So, good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. So, it's great to have everyone joining us. We have a very esteemed lineup today to talk about a very important topic going on right now, which is, of course, supply chain workforce management. Obviously, supply chains need to move, and the safety of our workers is paramount to that. So, let's get straight into it. I'd like to introduce first Susan Beardsley from ABI Research. So, how are you doing today, Susan?
I'm doing great, Nick. Thank you very much. So as Nick mentioned, I work for ABI Research and I lead our freight transportation and logistics service. And so covering all modes as well as fulfillment centers and all the software and hardware and processes around those.
Perfect. And then next we've got Ellen from the Women in Trucking Association. How are you doing today, Ellen?
I'm doing great, Nick. Thanks. My name's Goya. I'm the president and CEO of the Women in Trucking Association. And we're a nonprofit organization with about 5,500 members in 10 countries. And our mission is pretty simple. It's just to increase the percentage of women working in the trucking industry. And right now our focus has really been on our professional drivers who are members. Even though our members are everyone from people who own the trucks, buy the trucks, design the trucks, drive the trucks, fix the trucks, but we do have a large driver population, and that's been a real stress on our drivers. So I can't wait to talk about it.
Perfect. And last but not least, we've got Sylvia from Tire Hub. How are you doing today, Sylvia?
Hi, thanks very much for having me, Nick, and thanks on behalf of Tire Hub. Yeah, I'm very well, thanks. Pleased to say I'm well working from home, like many of us. Tire Hub is a joint venture between Goodyear and Bridgestone, two of the largest tire manufacturers in the world. We've been in business as a wholesale distributor in the US market now for about 22 months. We're operating 71 distribution centers across the US, and we've got a field workforce in sales and obviously in distribution as well. So thank you for having us. Appreciate it.
Perfect. So I guess to start off with, me personally, I got an email today that we're going to be working from home until at least the end of the month. So obviously we've been working from home for a very long time. So I guess starting off with Susan, how have you found the transitions to working from home, and maybe some key takeaways for the audience?
Absolutely. So I've been fortunate enough to work from home at ABI just as part of my ongoing business for about a year and a half at least. And so I think the biggest adjustment has been having a partner and children at home more often, which has not been the norm up until 6 weeks or so ago. I think some of the helpful things are to create specific spaces to communicate and over communicate with other people in your household when you have key meetings and deadlines, and then also be able to have a time to separate the work from the personal life, because it is easy to let that continue and let that be your focus. So I think all of that, as well as just being intentional, whether that's your work or your personal life.
Perfect. So bringing in Sylvia, I guess specifically talking about the transition to working from home and how to kind of manage the team that are under you in order to kind of keep productive.
Yeah, I think for our corporate office, what we call the hub, our employees, as we call them, our hubbers, we're able to work remotely, right? So similar situation, I guess, to Susan with anyone who's in more of a corporate role or a staff role where you can work from home, right? You can take your laptop home, and we're using different technology like Teams, for example, to be able to stay connected, whether it's through chat or phone, through Teams, or obviously all of our meetings through Teams now. So a little bit easier for folks in the office environment to be working from home. But still, it's challenging with managing home life as well, managing other family members in the house as well, and working around that. So we've encouraged our hubbers who are working remotely to make sure that they do take care of themselves as well. We have a daily operations stand-up meeting through Teams. We talk about safety every day. We talk about our across the network safety numbers every day. We encourage folks to, go take a walk in fresh air. Obviously, protect yourselves, wear a mask when you go out, but take a little bit of time out, because it can be quite stressful being on the laptop, on Teams calls, meetings all day long, and not able to take a break and walk around. We've also set up a couple of times a week, we have an online through Teams meditation session, just 15 minutes, breathing exercises that some of our team have taken up on the opportunity to do that, and that's been helpful and a little bit of a stress reliever a couple of times a week. But for the most part, of course, we are a physical distributor, so we've got majority of our 1,500 workforce across the US sitting in at what we call our tire hub logistics centers, and obviously our sales force. Most of our sales force are sitting at home working remotely. That does bring its own challenges, right? Because ordinarily they would be knocking on customers' doors, making those sales calls, building relationships, selling product, and that all has to happen remotely at the moment. But in our logistics centers, our folks who are actually physically distributing product, picking product, loading, and going into customer locations, that's been the primary area for us to really focus on safety and making sure that we've got good practices and processes in place every single day. So we are checking with our hubbers when they sign on for this shift every day, what their state of health and wellness is, and their families, and making sure that we're reinforcing good hygiene practices, sanitation of all the equipment before it gets passed from one person to the other. We're trying to make sure that that equipment is isolated to individual hubbers as we can. And then obviously as we go into customer locations, we want to make sure that we're keeping our customers safe as well. So we've got some mechanisms to make sure that we're not handing paper and pencil over, and we're doing that that delivery and that sign-on delivery on a remote platform.
Perfect. Excellent. So I guess, Ellen, kind of talking to what Sylvia mentioned in terms of the working from home. I know you mentioned before this call that you've been working from home already, so this wasn't something kind of new to you. I guess for folks that this is something new to, what would you give as maybe kind of 3 do's and don'ts for remote working?
So thank you for asking that, because we're a 13-year-old organization. Right now we have 10 staff members in 7 states. So we've always worked virtually, but here's one of the strongest tips I would say. Make sure you have a routine. Make sure that you get up and get dressed so you feel like you're going into the office. I actually have a separate office, and I know it's hard for some people if they're using a bedroom or whatever, but to get up, get dressed, start your day, have your cup of coffee ready, but make sure that you plan breaks. I take a walk every day, and I actually put it in my calendar so that I can go take a walk. And you have to stay healthy. You have to set boundaries, especially when you have family members around you. You have to say, mommy's working, please, you have to play and let me be on the phone, or let me do this webinar for the next hour. And then after that, we'll go do something. But also, I read a great article this morning, and it said the one email that you need to send out when you're working remotely. And I'm going to start following it. Every morning, say to your staff, this is what I'm working on today. And so they know what you're working on, when you're working on it, and if they can interrupt you or maybe put in your schedule or whatever. But I thought that was an excellent idea, and I'm going to start incorporating that. But I have to tell you that normally, without all these Zoom meetings, I'm usually in a t-shirt and shorts or jeans or whatever. So putting on makeup and doing your hair and wearing a women in trucking shirt is a little bit odd for me when I'm sitting here by myself.
Definitely. So, so Susan, kind of talking to that, the importance of productivity. Obviously, it is strange suddenly for a lot of folks transitioning from working in an office to working from home. How have you personally found keeping productivity up personally, and then within your team as well?
Good question, Nick. So one is, and it's an extension of what Ellen just mentioned, is I put together on email a list for my boss of all the different projects. And by the way, this was not something required, but I found it helps keep me accountable and organized of all the different clients, all the different deliverables, large and small. And so things are kind of broken up into buckets, if you will, for that week. And that's something I share with my employee. And we're all located in different countries, so between Belgium, the UK, and the US. So I think that is very helpful. I have regular check-ins over the phone with my employee and once a week with my boss, and that way we can catch things in between. I do think it's more important than ever before, and Sylvia mentioned this, of as we don't have the FaceTime. I used to travel a decent amount, and so I have a lot more meetings with my clients, and maybe 10 or 15 minutes are just checking in on everyone's well-being, or what TV programs they're watching, or what if they're gardening and all, walking, whatever, right? So just relationship building as best that we can. And so I think that's an important part. But I also try and encourage my own employee, as we mentioned, of when to shut the laptop down so he can have time with his family, and he can have that we all need, that mental and emotional break as well. So, and flexibility is so important. We get unforeseen things, like I'm sure Ellen and Sylvia have as well, where we have a client with an urgent need, for example, and be able to respond to that, and then as much as possible on the fly adjust other things we may have planned, because we're here because we have our customers.
Definitely. So Sylvia, you mentioned this in terms of the meditation. I was just wondering, in terms of the general idea of the welfare of your workers, of the team, maybe what other things have you done other than meditation in order to keep the spirits high in these kind of quite depressing times, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, some of our leaders have set up contests, and just to generate a little bit of enthusiasm and a bit of team spirit. Our car dealer team have got some a kind of bingo game that they're playing virtually. So there are different things that we're doing in that respect to keep people motivated. But I think it is about that regular check-in as well, and just making sure that when we are on Teams calls, for example, putting the video cam on, because I think if you've got that visual contact with someone, then one, it maintains the engagement in the conversation, just as we are now, actually, as I'm looking at you, Nick, for example, as we're talking. But also, I think it just helps people to stay connected more. It's awfully difficult if it's more of a phone conversation in those sorts of meetings.
Definitely, yeah. I mean, talking from our team's perspective, we've been doing regular pub quizzes. So a lot of people have had to find exhausting a lot of questions out there, so having to find new questions to ask people in these pub quizzes. We've been doing, virtual happy hours a lot, trying to maintain that kind of air of normalcy in these strange times. So I guess Ellen, as someone who is more of a virtual kind of expert, someone that's done this for a while now. How have you kind of found that as well when it comes to kind of the importance of keeping people engaged with stuff that's not central to working, like the happy hours that I mentioned?
Well, one of the things that I really have to work on is to tell my team they're doing a good job. I need to remind myself, when they do something positive, that I have to say, good job, because everybody's so siloed and they feel like nobody's noticing what they're doing. So I have to really make a conscious effort to say, hey, good job. And also, to add to Sylvia and Susan, I asked my team members to send me bullet points. Hey, what did you do yesterday? Just send me some bullet points, and then I'll look at them and I'll go, oh, whoa, wait, you shouldn't be working on that, or let me help you on this, or let's put that as not as a top priority. So getting the bullet points helps me tremendously, but keeping morale up is very important, because people just feel like they're so alone, and so we need to overcome that.
Definitely.
I think that's a great point, Ellen. Just one thing I would add is I think transparency is even more important than it was And so not only do we have all hands on deck separated by geo that we have once a month with our executives where they share a lot of things about the business as appropriate, but I think that I try and do that especially with my own employee to go very specifically on where we stand, not only with projects, but whatever is that I'm able to share on a near daily basis. I think that's very important because people feel even more removed, even if some of them had worked from home, but many from an office, to make a point of oversharing whatever is, of course, appropriate. And then just check in on people's lives also as much as appropriate. How are their partners or their kids or their pets and things like that? And I'll send silly memes out to people that are, still suitable for work, but nonetheless, just as an encouragement or to give a laugh to people to kind of lighten the mood a little bit and make something a little unexpected.
Yeah, we're doing something similar with our what we call our Friday morning hub huddles. So normally it's in person. Normally we would just gather everyone who works in the corporate office, gather them together in person, and we would normally talk about the results from the week. But we'll talk about new hubbers to the team, birthdays, anniversaries, that kind of thing, and celebrate some of the personal elements of the team. We're doing that remotely still, so we're doing it on a Teams call. Now, clearly, with tens of people on a call, you can't see everybody on that call, but we'll also have the chat feature going. So there's different shout outs and comments and jokes that are made on the chat feature on Teams as well, which brings a little bit of fun into the team too. But actually, Nick, I wanted to mention one other thing with our sales force. Of course, with our sales force all being remote, it does make it hard to keep that connection going with customers. But our sales force are making calls on our customers that are merely to check in. It's more of a check-in. How are you doing? How's your family doing? It's a real kind of connecting call rather than a sales call, just to make sure we're maintaining those relationships. And actually what we found is in many of the cases, those customers have called back and said, hey, actually we realized that yes, you are still open, you're still delivering twice a day to our neighborhood, and we'd like to order product from you. So we found that just that regular check-in and kind of health and wellness check with customers by our sales force has really helped to drive business, and we weren't really expecting it to do so. So that's been a nice relationship builder for us.
Excellent. Yeah, I feel like the term relationship building is now more important than ever, really, and not to kind of just see selling as something transactional. It's something more than that. It's developing that relationship and actually helping people in this time. I think that's more important than ever. And we got a question from the audience, which is interesting. Something that we've spoken about a lot internally is obviously you want to keep your colleagues engaged, the workforce engaged, but some folks are feeling slightly micromanaged with the need for the Teams calls and the need for the constant checking in, whereas they felt like maybe previously working in the office they had a little bit more autonomy and independence. I guess, Susan, just talking to that point, how do you balance the need to check in without folks feeling like they're being micromanaged?
I think that's a great point, Nick, and certainly I'm someone that doesn't enjoy and doesn't have an issue with being micromanaged. But I think part of it is a balance of the personal, as Sylvia and Ellen have talked about already, whether it's an employee or whether it's with a client. I think it's really about trying to get to know them better under these very unusual circumstances. And also really listening. I mean, I know that sounds very basic, but instead of talking to them, listening to them, and that way you understand where there may be challenges. And I always trying to make it where I encourage, if somebody's feeling frustrated, I want to know it. It's not in a judgmental way. It's a trying to understand where we can come to a mutual solution. And it's also emphasizing my trust in my employees. So it's not a matter of micromanaging, but help them try to come to the conclusion, help them problem solve, even more so today when we have these given circumstances. I think all of those things help.
And Nick,
Definitely.
I'd like to weigh in on that one.
Hmm.
So I give my staff more autonomy as far as their schedule. And so if you know, one of my staff members says, well, I want to take my son for a walk every day at 3 o'clock, fine, then I know. And I have a staff member whose husband is a teacher, and so they have to share the computers, and in the meantime try to homeschool 3 kids. So when she says, hey, my schedule is going to be disrupted, that's fine. I'm totally okay with that. I give them a lot more control over their schedule maybe during these times, because it'll go back to whatever the normal is after this, when their kids are back in school and you know, things like that. So giving them the flexibility in their schedule, I think, gives them a little bit more autonomy.
Definitely. Sylvie, do you have any points to that?
Yeah, I think we're doing something similar, right? I mean, our teams pretty much set their own schedule. Of course, leadership will set projects, goals, etc., deliverables. But I feel like, you know, if I think about the way that my team operate, they will respond and get things done. And I'm certainly not going to try to tell them that they've got to do X at 10 a.m. and Y at 11 a.m. I mean, we've actually set aside the lunchtime as well now. So the 12 till 1 spot, we've said no meetings during that time. Because we did find it was a little bit of a process of how do we get into this remote working and make sure that people aren't overwhelmed with it. And so we've said no meetings 12 till 1. Folks need to have that break. And at least even if you do have a busy meeting schedule online, then at least you've got that time to get out, get some fresh air, go get some lunch, have some time with your kids or have some time with your other half, and just, you know, decompress a little bit before the afternoon gets started. So I think I would agree with both Susan and Ellen on that.
Perfect. Excellent. So I guess switching tack slightly, obviously, we're fortunate enough that we can work from home. I think Sylvia, you mentioned this earlier with your distribution centers and the importance of the safety of the workers. So I guess I wanted to start with Ellen. When it comes to specifically drivers, obviously are needed to move the supply chain. They can't work from home even if they wanted to. Can you talk to the importance of keeping drivers safe during this time and what you've seen in terms of the measures to keep drivers safe, if that makes sense?
Drivers are on the front line. I mean, and they're my new hero. They've always been my hero, but the fact that they're out there delivering and they're exposing themselves to COVID-19, and then reduced opportunities, like states are closing their waysides, rest areas, so they don't have restroom facilities as available as they once did, and the truck stops are closing their sit-in dining, so they're expected to go to drive-throughs, and you can't take an 18-wheeler through a drive-through. So, and also when they deliver it, some places they're expected to have the protective equipment, the masks and the, you know, be prepared. And if they can't get masks or sanitizers to be able to clean their trucks or keep their hands clean, it's been a real challenge. And social distancing, pulling up to a loading dock, and just making sure that people are respecting that. Some of our drivers will go to places where people aren't respecting the social distancing, and that makes them nervous. But they're out there and they're delivering, and so I think that the fact that people are starting to recognize what professional drivers bring to the economy is great. I hope we can maintain that after this, because right now people are doing such great things to support drivers. They're getting meals for them. They're helping them with products. We had a driver featured in the New York Times, and she talked about how she felt like she was out there naked, being exposed. And the calls just all poured in, offering to provide, you know, sanitizers and masks and things like that. So my goal is to make sure that this hero worship for professional drivers who are out there on the front line continues after this is over.
Excellent. So yeah, Susan, would you like to weigh in on what Ellen just mentioned?
Yeah, absolutely. And I fully agree. I hope that that continues with drivers, and we have family members that are involved in maintenance. I have immediate family member that's on the front lines of providing food in the retail space. So I think that there's a couple things. One is I think there's some interesting work going on to complement a lot of the long haul drivers that Ellen was mentioning with last mile. And I see a lot of technology growth and a lot of government support for whether that's NHTSA, FAA, and others for some of these delivery pods. So that keeps some of these food retail workers safe, where they can load up one of these pods and it can deliver to people that are sheltering in place in their homes. So like their Neuros and the Starship Technologies, and then we see like the UPS and CVS, the largest pharmacy, with the Flight Forward program with certain pharmaceutical products. So I think that's one thing that I see will continue, and that's going from kind of the onesie twosies into potentially thousands a year. I think physical barriers were possible. Plexiglass, PPE, as Ellen was mentioning, spread out workstations where possible, staggered shifts is another option, and even touch-free options, so people aren't touching like a keypad necessarily, or things that could take place for proof of delivery. That's another thing for the last mile where I think we can see some changes, as well as the need for enhanced industrial cleaning on surfaces. So for our maintenance workers, my family member that works on that, they have to use special guidelines to clean the trucks when they receive them and then before they return them. So there's a lot to keep the truckers safe on the maintenance side, as well as the maintenance workers themselves. And probably tying in with Sylvia, there's a lot more need for these trucks that are going full on for tires and oil and brakes and all these critical items. And so there's a really important link between the drivers and the maintenance staff.
Excellent. So, Susan, you touched on an interesting point there about the concept of the delivery and the proof of delivery. Sylvia, I was wondering, how has this situation impacted how you fulfill your orders and how you kind of interact with your customers?
Yeah, ordinarily we'd be using an iPad, for the most part, an iPad for a customer to acknowledge on the touchscreen the delivery's been made and accurate. Obviously, we don't want that physical contact on those surfaces, right? So initially, when we first started to work within the confines of COVID-19, we were actually asking our delivery specialists to use a sanitizer wipe. So when they use the in between them using and the customer using the touchscreen. What we then developed into was a more of a remote process. So we would show the customer the screen and have a verbal acknowledgement that that was an okay way to go forward and that they were happy with the delivery, and then our delivery person would actually acknowledge that for them. So we then eliminated any duplicated contact on the touchscreen. But we found that that's been working really quite well for us. For the most part, when our logistics specialists go into a customer location, we've got a very clear process. They maintain social distancing. They know where they need to deliver the product to, and then, as I said, the only piece of previously the only piece of physical contact would have been through the iPad for delivery. So we've managed to keep our people safe in that respect. I think the other thing that we've done is obviously, I mean, I'm sure that most folks have done this, and Ellen spoke to it. You know, there's the sanitizer, there's the wipes, there's the social distancing, the other PPE that we provided, masks, for example. So all of our delivery drivers will be wearing a mask. Some of our customers were requiring that anyway, but safety is a real high priority for us at Tire Hub, and so we've mandated that. Also within our logistics centres, I mean, we want to make sure that we're protecting our hubbers within the logistics centre. It's not just with that customer contact, right? Because they may be bringing something into the distribution centre, and so wearing masks whenever they can, making sure that when they're in common spaces like in the restrooms, in the break rooms, that they obviously use sanitizer wipes if they're using the microwave, or wipe down the common surfaces where they might eat their lunch in the break room, etc. So we've put some clear processes in place so they keep themselves, each other, and customers safe.
Excellent. So Ellen, just talking to what Sylvia mentioned, are there any other best practices you've seen in terms of keeping drivers safe that some of the audience maybe could take away?
Well, let's talk about eating, okay? So if a driver pulls into a fast food restaurant, they can't pull into the drive-through, and they're not allowed to walk up to the drive-through because of social distancing. So some restaurants have initiated an app. So you order on the app, you pay on the app, and then you go to a designated area in the parking lot, and they'll bring your food out to you and hand it to you. So, I mean, to me, that's a great solution. As far as delivering, and providing supplies when a driver goes to a loading dock, the Federal Motor Carrier Safety Administration now has 1 million masks that they're handing out to drivers so that they are getting the equipment. But best practices, whoever heard of the term contactless delivery up until a month ago? So best practices are staying away. I mean, even if you're ordering a pizza, they're going to drop it off at your front door. You pay ahead of time, and so there's lots of best practices out there. And I have a feeling that after this continues, we're going to be following some of those even after the virus is gone.
Definitely. So Susan, obviously, Ellen mentioned it earlier, some of the feel-good stories. Obviously, this is, a news-driven market that is quite negative at times if you switch on whatever news station you decide. There has been some very good feel-good stories when it comes to drivers. I was wondering if you could maybe emphasize the newfound importance that we've seen in supply chain. Obviously, people looking at their stores and seeing, a lack of toilet paper or whatever product it is, and are realizing, supply chains are complicated. I wonder if you can maybe highlight the newfound spotlight that we've seen on supply chain, whether that's drivers, whether that's warehouses.
Absolutely. So one thing I think that has proven to be especially difficult in these times has been the adherence to JIT, or just in time, as part of the supply chain. And that's probably, Sylvia, as one example, has probably seen things, at least in the industry, of where that's occurred. And that's from also things like foodstuffs and all the chemicals and the paper goods and all of those things. So I think the other thing that people have had an understanding of is the interrelationship, as you mentioned, Nick, the complexity of the supply chain. So for example, in China, something like 30% of many common pharmaceuticals have compounds that come from China. We also have many components in electronics, and this has taken place over approximately, depending on the industry, about a 20-year period of time, at least since the beginning of this century. So even during Lunar New Year, right, trying to move goods, whether that's the medical compounds or even things going to, say, Vietnam or Thailand or other places. So to really understand, and another piece is the relationship across modes. So we had a lot of what they call blank sailings for the sea shipments. And so we had a lot of these large containers in the wrong place when China started back up. A lot of them were in Western Europe and North America, for example. Well, that takes, give or take, a month just to move those to the other continent. And then obviously it's another month back. So we ended up with 2.5 months, sometimes delay in getting some of those products, depending on what you're looking at. And that's also, to my understanding, what's going on with some of the cleaning products that many of us have been after. Some of these chemical compounds have to come from other parts of the world in order to make the end product that's then packaged and then, of course, shipped on trucks much of the time to get to the fulfillment centers and ultimately your retail outlets. So I think people are starting to have a bit more of awareness of the complexity. I also think we're going to see over time either a China plus one strategy, which is clearly not an overnight approach, or whether that's in country sourcing, on continent sourcing, or things split amongst even parts of a given country. And so I think it'll be interesting to see what happens to kind of a sales and operations planning, to demand and supply management, because many of these products are very complex, and there is, of course, a cost to duplication of inventory of raw materials and things like that. So there's no quick and easy answers, but there's a lot of people reevaluating. And I think even the consumer is a bit more aware now of the complexity from raw materials to something that ends up in their real or virtual shopping cart.
Excellent. So
Dick,
just bring it.
can I make a
Sorry,
comment?
go ahead, Ellen. Yep.
Well, so the positive thing, the silver lining, the other silver lining out of this is that we have jobs in the trucking industry.
Yeah.
In fact, they're still hiring. And here's the weird thing that people aren't really thinking about. Okay, so they're slaughtering hogs and they're dumping milk and they're burying potatoes because the restaurants aren't needing this. Well, what happens when the restaurants and the movie theaters and the conference centers and malls start ramping up? Guess what? All that food's going to need to be delivered. All the malls are going to have to be stocked again, and with whatever styles are, and so the trucking industry isn't going to hit the slump like the rest of the economy. And all these people on unemployment can look at the trucking industry and go, wow, they're still running. They have jobs even despite COVID-19. So maybe I should consider a job in the trucking industry. Now, that being said, the truck driving schools are closed
Right.
because so we have a conundrum here that we want to train potential drivers and we need them, but we're going to have to work through this. But we have jobs and they're well-paying jobs and there's the cure jobs.
Definitely. So Sylvia, just talking to Ellen's point and Susan as well, the newfound highlight that we've seen on the supply chain industry as a whole.
Yeah, it's interesting because prior to working with Tire Hub and working in the tire industry, I worked in CPG and retail, so with Starbucks and with Kimberly-Clark, paper goods. And the tire industry is not just in time in the same sense. And much of our product does come in from outside of United States. China, Southeast Asia, South America, other parts of the world, Europe. But the manufacturers have actually had fairly high inventories over the past year or so. And we've been fortunate enough to maintain our high inventory levels with the support of our shareholders. And so, having the right tires at the right time is paramount in the tire industry, right? As a wholesale distributor, as a consumer, when you go to your tire dealer, if they don't have the right tires available, then you're not going to wait until the next day or next week to go back, right? You'll go down the road and you'll find the next nearest tire dealer because there are lots on the high street. And so making sure that we've got right inventory, right place, right time from a good supply chain perspective has been possibly more achievable for us by maintaining those high inventory levels. And we've really shifted our S&OP process. I know Susan was talking about S&OP, and we've had a monthly S&OP process, and we still have that, but we're almost doing a weekly S&OP now by looking at, what will our sellout be? What has it been over the last week? How is the trend going? And where will we be next week? So, it's almost that short interval control that we've got to put in place now, week by week, rather than it being on a month-to-month basis, because things are changing pretty quickly. So, even over the last couple of weeks, we've seen a little bit of an uptick in our business, which has been great to see. But if we'd relied on our monthly process, we may not have been as well prepared for that as we have been.
Perfect. So you mentioned this earlier, Sylvia, about your 71 distribution centers. We've obviously gone into depth quite a lot on the drivers and the measures that can be employed there to keep drivers safe. In terms of within the distribution centers and the labor that is required to move this product, specifically, what measures have you implemented in order to keep those folks safe within the warehouses, within distribution centers?
Yeah, so we've got a daily routine that we're operating. So as I mentioned, we have a daily stand-up meeting. So when the hubbers come into any of our Tire Hub logistics centers, come on shift, there'll be a daily stand-up meeting. We'll reinforce the safety measures that we're taking, make sure that we basically ask a handful of questions of every single one of those hubbers. And those questions are simple, but it's really just to understand what's their own personal health and wellness status. Are they living with anyone, or have they come into contact with anyone who may have developed COVID or been tested positive for COVID, or be in the process of being tested, so that we've got a sense of are they going to be okay to come into contact with other hubbers and with customers. So that's the start of the day, and then the physical sanitary practices and hygiene practices I mentioned before. But when those folks then go into the warehouse and they start to go about their daily tasks, again, making sure that they keep the distance, making sure they're wearing masks when they should, making sure that if they happen to go to an order picker and operate that fork truck and operate the touch screen that's on that order picker, that they wipe down the screen before they use it. And so making sure that we're just keeping that practice going at all times. Those are really the practices that we're operating to within the warehouse. And as I said, just making sure that they don't take their eye off the ball. It takes quite a lot of focus and takes a lot of reiteration from the leadership in each of the centres to make sure that folks are practicing good hygiene at all times, including the common areas, as I mentioned earlier.
Perfect. So bringing in Sue, obviously, Sylvia mentioned there that the measures in place to keeping the workers within the warehouses and distribution centres safe. There's been a lot of news recently about the food supply chain in the States and the closing down of plants due to COVID-19. Referencing kind of what Sylvia mentioned, what measures have you seen that potentially folks could implement in order to keep those workers safe in those specific supply chains?
Excellent question. So one is, where possible, there's some things that can be automated. So we've seen where you could separate things. It's nascent, but some early use of smart glasses, for example, to find things, or some robotics that can scan SKUs as another example. The plexi glasses I've mentioned before. I think it was Sylvia mentioned a lot of good things already about the break spaces and some of the entry points and things of that nature. I think also touchless. So Sylvia mentioned the iPad. I think any ability to scan things like off a badge, so you're not touching something, is another really important. Even splitting out, we're seeing more use of hotspot fulfillment centers, especially in the CPG area, closer to urban and suburban areas. So maybe you can have the current staff spread out across more locations when possible, also behind a retail place like a Target or a Walmart, for example. So sometimes there's ways to spread out the staff. Sometimes they're even on multiple stories, where that's pretty early, but we are starting to see more of that, as well as different types of predictive analytics that we can use, machine learning, in order to idealize what that workflow looks like. So I think we'll see more of that. And then just to add to that, over time, systems integration, which goes over and above the S&OP, as Sylvia and I have talked about. But the more you can align through your warehouse management, your transportation management, some of the things that's under the helm of Ellen and company, and then your ERP systems like your SAP, Oracle, et cetera. The more you have that visibility, that way you're not necessarily having to put as many people in a particular area based on where you see the demand and the goods movement.
Excellent. So talking now about obviously the longer term aspects of this crisis. Obviously, it is still pretty raw in the UK. I think Boris said yesterday we are at the peak of the crisis. I'm not sure if that's actually true, but we'll see. In terms of some longer term impacts, Ellen, how do you kind of see this crisis impacting supply chains and drivers specifically in the longer term?
I think that people are going to try to diversify more and be less dependent on getting products from China, because I mean, this has shown us what our dependence on China has done to disrupt our supply chain. This has been huge. So I think people are going to start looking at other areas. Also, to Susan's point, more automation. I think we're going to see more automation. You've heard, you've seen that there's autonomous trucks being tested on the roads out there. I personally don't think you're going to see a truck without a driver in it in the near future, but I think that you're going to see a lot more technology and a lot more ways to implement technology to either reduce the need for, we're not going to reduce the need for drivers. You're still going to need an operator, but maybe assisting them in doing their job. I mean, one company actually has drivers sitting in an office like a big game, like a screen, and operating the truck out on the road, and they can see everything around them. So I think you're going to see, to Sylvia's point, a lot more technology out there, and less touching. I think drivers will, years ago, drivers used to have to unload their own trucks many years ago. And it's now when you see on the back of a trailer drop and hook only, it means that the driver's dropping the trailer and hooking to a new one and going off and not unloading. I think you're going to see a lot more drop and hook. And a contactless delivery, whether it's pizza or a trailer. I just think that some of the long-term effects that we're going to be seeing are, I think they're all positive, actually.
Excellent. So Sylvia, kind of talking to that, what do you kind of see as some of the longer term impacts of what's going on right now?
Yeah, I think there's been talk of a second wave of COVID-19 as well, right? And so I think we'll get back to a different way of working, maybe not quite back to normal, but I think when the economy opens up a little bit more and so on, there may be a second wave. I think the experience that we've had at Tyre Hub and the preparation that we put into dealing with coronavirus right now will stand us in good stead. I think we'll be better prepared if we have to deal with a second wave. I mean, for example, we've put in place a really proactive and speedy decision tree that enables us to understand where our hubbers have been, what routes they've delivered on. We're leveraging technology for that to understand our routing. We're using telematics to understand which customers they may have dropped product into on that route. So understanding that will better help us to make decisions around keeping our people safe and keeping our customers safe. And should we or should we not make decisions about temporarily closing and deep cleaning some of our distribution centers as need be, right? So I think having that routing software with the telematics has been a real boon for us, actually, and really helped us to speedily identify where our delivery guys have been and whether there's any risk.
Excellent.
Nick, can I add something? I'd
Yep.
like to add something, and Sylvia touched on this earlier about the mental health of our employees. So suicide rates are up, divorces are up, depression is up, people are feeling isolated, and yet our drivers are out there on the front lines. And so at Women in Trucking, we actually are giving all of our professional drivers who are members, men and women, 90 days of free mental health counseling. And so they can call in and get, so that if they have challenges or they have questions, and I'm gonna put this under what are some of the long-term effects. I think we're all gonna be more sensitive to our employees' mental health issues and how can we help them cope through, whether it's family issues or something like this. So, I mean, we felt a need to help our drivers because they're out there and we need them to have good mental health. And we don't want to see an increase in suicides and depression. So I think that's a long-term effect we're all going to be more sensitive to.
Excellent. So bring in Susan, kind of what to Ellen and Sylvia just mentioned. What are your thoughts on kind of the longer term aspects of this situation?
Well, I really think the current conditions are going to act as an accelerant for some of these initiatives we've been talking about. And going back to what Ellen said, really the future of work, like how does that change what a driver does? Or with Sylvia, what does that change in a fulfillment center? And so I think this is going to be a new wave of scalable technology. One that I'll add to that I've started to see with some drivers, and I think what Ellen said is fantastic. I think telemedicine is another one. So you have somebody on the road, if they can talk to a doctor who can prescribe something so they could pick up something at a pharmacy that's near where they are, or find a safe place to stay if they're under the weather and don't have to drive 700 miles to get there. So kind of a plethora of services, I think, is one thing. I think video has a lot of opportunities in the driving space as well, and some of that could do with load and unload. Some of it can do with some of the growth in automation without being, fully driverless trucks, as you're saying. So I think there's a lot and a lot of opportunities tied to that for growing skill sets. I think not only with the human machine interaction, I think what we're going to see for drivers and fulfillment workers is a lot of opportunity to learn to work not only with each other, but with machines, whether that's training them to do something side by side or working in concert, or like I said, the smart glasses, or I've seen this in the maintenance business with virtual reality, like training some of the maintenance workers remotely where they can actually see what's going on inside the truck to make those repairs. So you can take a master technician and train a new person coming up. So I think there's a lot of ways of repurposing existing technology that will go a long way to actually growing the opportunities and growing the skill sets of a lot of these people that we depend on so completely in the supply chain.
Excellent, excellent. So now we're coming up towards the end of this virtual roundtable. I guess to start off with Sylvia, do you have any closing remarks based on what we've spoken about today, and also where can folks find out a little bit more about Tire Hub or yourself as well?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if folks want to find out more about Tire Hub, then just look us up on the web, tirehub.com. I think in closing, I would say, look, we're not perfect. We're not pretending that we've got things completely ironed out, but I think we've put a rigorous process in place to keep our hubbers safe and keep our customers safe. But certainly, if after this, if anyone's got any ideas about what we could be doing differently or any improvement on what we're doing, I would love to hear it, because we don't pretend to have all the answers for sure. And obviously, we're now thinking about how do we get folks back to work who have been working remotely, and how do we do that in a staged way and in a methodical way that where we don't open them up to health risks. I loved what both Susan and Ellen said about helping people deal with the mental health challenges of what we're going through. Different people have a different response to the situation today. Some people will be very, very happy to get back to work. For some, it may not have been a very positive experience working remotely, and for others, it will be the opposite. And so we're thinking through all of that as well as we think about how do we bring our folks back into the workforce in an office environment. I loved what Ellen said earlier on about truckers being at the forefront of the front line. We see our hubbers in the field as exactly that. They are our frontline workers. We are proud of what they're doing every day to deliver tires to our customers. We are considered to be an essential service, and obviously we're very proud to be continuing to support, in particular, truckers who are doing what they need to do to keep the country going, keep food supplies going, etc., and essential workers like the folks in hospitals and healthcare workers and emergency services as well. All of those vehicles need tires, so we're happy to be doing our part, and I appreciate the opportunity to have the conversation today. Thank you.
Excellent. So it's bringing in Susan now. What are your closing remarks, and where can folks find out more about ABI research?
Certainly. So please feel free to go to abiresearch.com. Would love to be able to share some of the other many technology and strategic solutions. That being said, I think looking ahead, there are some very exciting things that will come out of these very difficult times. And I would encourage everyone to look and still solve many of the existing pain points, whether that's with trucking detention time, parking solutions, some of the safety solutions that Sylvia talked about in fulfillment, whether that's human machine interaction, minimize contact solutions, et cetera. But I would just want to give my deep thanks for the essential workers, from truckers to fulfillment to grocery, and of course our healthcare workers. And I'm hoping that long term, this does really provide a greater appreciation for what literally keeps our country moving.
Excellent. And last but not least, we have Ellen. So what are your closing remarks, and where can folks find out more about Women in Trucking Association?
Well, thank you for this opportunity, Nick. And my closing remark is we need to all think about how, since we're all connected by technology, we're much more vulnerable to cyber attacks. And that really scares me. Whether it's connectivity with our trucks, connectivity with each other, connectivity with our facilities, we need to be very vigilant on making sure that we aren't crippled by a cyber attack. That being said, on a positive note, people can find Women in Trucking Association at womenintrucking.org. We're a nonprofit association, so I ask people to check it out.
Excellent, perfect. Well, that concludes today's virtual roundtable. Obviously, we have a number of these coming up. Information and supply chain is now, more important than ever. So I'd encourage people to register for those coming up. And lastly, thanks lots for the panelists today. And I hope to see you on a virtual roundtable soon.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Take care.